His real name was Milo, and he was caught up in a myriad of taboo online activity. Upon checking out his post history, we'll notice that he talked about his past life in various wars, discussed information technology, and constantly berated spammers that plagued the subreddit he moderated, r/jailbait. You see, Milo isn't a very good person, at least considering what we know through his online footprint. r/jailbait, for those unaware, was a subreddit focused on sharing technically clothed but compromising images of underage girls. It was a cesspool, and I'm sure you can gauge the community that festered there. Despite this, the subreddit had a thriving user base of thousands, and alongside its creator, who would later be exposed on national television, Religion of Peace relatively coasted under the radar through most of its major controversy. During their time on Reddit, Religion of Peace was known to be highly active. With consistent activity throughout his days, it seemed to be an outlet for him in which he'd unapologetically share his political beliefs and opinions. For instance, he despised corporations like Fox News and CNN and regularly lashed out to anyone who gave technical advice that he didn't agree with. To be frank, to those that interacted with him, he was known to utilize relatively vulgar language with phrases like, "You bitch, get the fuck off," and the classic, "fuck off and die." I'm sure you get the picture as to what type of person Religion of Peace, or Milo, was. He was abrasive and caught up in a myriad of questionable activity. Alongside this, though, Religion of Peace harbored a pretty extensive military background through his self-proclaimed stints in the Cold War, being stationed in Palestine from 1946 to 1949, and astonishingly, even the Battle of Normandy. Now, of course, this could easily be the work of a troll or someone role-playing for attention. Milo regularly justified his war knowledge with claims that he was born in 1930 and enlisted at the early age of 13. In fact, he claimed that he was age 79 constantly, which is pretty damn impressive considering how active and conversational he was just about every day. Every 80-year-old that I've personally met doesn't exactly care about what's happening online, and especially not on a barely 4-year-old website like Reddit was back then. Regardless, no one really questioned it. If anything, people were interested in his background, and he was always willing to share it. Of course, always with a healthy dose of banter mixed in. On the 18th of May 2009 at around 2:22 p.m., the scope of the Religion of Peace account would change. A post was made in the r/reddit.com subreddit with a simple title. "I got tired of using commercial image hosts. I set up my own. You can use it if you want." With the link to a website called LakeCityQuietPills.com. Upon heading to LakeCityQuietPills.com, you'd be met with a simple webpage with a title that seemingly has nothing to do with the URL at all. That old guy's image host is what you'd expect, and given Milo's activity from Reddit, I'm sure you can gauge the type of content he wanted here. Upon exploring the website, we can observe how archaic everything is. The About Us section explains the website's convenience, the terms of service lays down the rules, the public gallery showcases a random assortment of images, the report abuse page gives a basic plain text form, and the random image link, of course, generates a random image. Aside from the web address, that old guy's image host seemed to be nothing more than an obscure, taboo image hosting website that Milo, an already questionable individual, was trying to get off the ground. This is where our story would and should end. However, on the 16th of July 2009, Milo, in a random response comment on a completely random post about Navy SEALs, would effectively plant the seed to a mystery. LOL. I always get a laugh when I read articles demonstrating such naivety. Of course there are assassinations. There are some things that the legal system can't fix. I'm awaiting the massive flood of downvotes without surprise. So many people actually believe that as fucked up as things are right now, and as they have been for the last 20 years, that they aren't needed. What do you want to bet that Bernie Madoff follows Ken Lay's path? I can think of any number of criminal organizations that would benefit from a dose of Lake City quiet pills. Clearly alluding to homicide. Why was a mere archaic image board given a URL with the same phrase? It seems oddly specific, and what most were unaware of back then was that this simple phrase, Lake City Quiet Pills, would serve as a trailhead for one of the most intriguing unsolved internet mysteries of all time.
Congratulations, you won. Congratulations, congratulations, you won. Congratulations, congratulations, you won. Congratulations, you won. Congratulations.
From May onwards, Milo kept at his antics, regularly discussing his war stories and demeaning the naysayers. He was true to form. In one of his comments, he outlines his retirement from the armed forces in 1987 and explains how he's happy that he found a job that, quote, doesn't require much physical effort and works for me. Happily, it's a computer-related field. His verbiage made it seem that he was still employed at 79 years old, which, while not impossible, is definitely extraordinary. As a matter of fact, being a person of extraordinary circumstances was probably the best way you could describe Religion of Peace, as he was doing and had done things that were wildly out of the realm of normality for those his age, even during adolescence. He was a person who not only enlisted into the armed forces at the age of 14, but was also present during a multitude of monumental historical events, reformed into an ongoing highly technical career in computer science at age 57, is somehow extremely invested in conversing on Reddit at the age of 79, and is completely open about discussing some of what should be some of the darkest times in his life. Now, with this precedent under our belts, we understand where the idea of Lake City Quiet Pill stems from. The life of Religion of Peace wasn't just a one-arc story. He was versed in a field that made sense considering his current circumstances, and given the fact that he was a moderator for a highly taboo subreddit, the existence of that old guy's image host was one of the few things that actually made sense in the realm of Milo's life. I mean, if we back up and look at it, LakeCityQuietPills.com is just a simple, bare-bones website after all. As summer of 2009 approached, Milo would regularly promote Lake City Quiet Pills in his day-to-day activity. Tired of Imager? Boom, he's got you covered. Hate making accounts? Milo's got a site for that. He approached his website promotion with the real boots-on-the-ground methodology, and as you'd expect, this was only marginally effective. Despite this, the website garnered most of its attention on r/jailbait, much to the credit of his constant self-promotion. And by July of 2009, it had successfully garnered a whopping 2,254 images under its belt. Expectedly, it was mostly porn. But I'm sure that's what he hoped for anyway. And so, with effectively no one batting an eye at the peculiarity of the URL, the website slowly began to take off. And Milo is living large. At around 1 a.m. Central Time on July 17th of 2009, Religion of Peace would make a comment stating the following. I reported a couple hundred obvious bullshit Reddits. Shit for roofers, lawyers, local businesses, and shit like that. Just those one-offs that spammers make, thinking that we actually look at their postings. They're all still there. I'm getting very discouraged, even after trading messages with admins about the spam situation. I don't think they really care all that much, like this daily lawyer attorney spam. I downmod and report every day, and the next morning there's another round from the same spammers. The admins need some aggressive mods to ban domains and user accounts. It's getting really out of control. At first, this comment seems pretty uneventful. Milo is once again complaining about spammers, something he did consistently for years. The thing is, this comment was the last that he would ever make. And from this point forward, Religion of Peace, as we know him, would vanish. In the hours that followed, no one really noticed that Milo was gone. His last post was in the late hours of the night, and many that did regularly interact with him likely assumed that he was asleep. At around 1 p.m., an account is made. And just 50 minutes later, they'd make their first post. The end of Religion of Peace. He died today. Milo died today. He was 79 years old. He died at his desk looking at your site. Milo was a mean old fucker. Mean and honorary. He hooked me up with my first gig when I got out of the army. I didn't like finding him like that. Milo don't have any living relatives and no real friends, and other than his landlady and a few people where he worked, he didn't talk to anyone about much of anything. Me, he just tolerated. As I said, he was mean. I think he used that as a shield to keep people away from him. Milo thought God was some kind of con game thought up by some lazy sons of bitches who didn't want to work every day. So he's going in the fire on Monday without a service just like he wanted. I'm planning to dump his ashes in the woods near where he was born. Can't put them right there because there's a mall there now. I gave the girl next door his raggedy old cat and most of his books, his computer's Intronic shitty tag for the disabled vets in the VVA. All the rest of the stuff is for the Salvation Army. All those years and everything he owned fits in the trunk of my car. I don't know what else to say. I'll miss him. Miserable bastard. The comment section was mostly positive, with most Redditors replying in support. However, there were a few naysayers. I'm sorry, this all seems so fake. Are you guys genuinely believing this? Edit. Wow, for such a skeptical site, you guys are swallowing this hook, line, and sinker. What a convenient story. Died looking at Reddit, died making posts keeping people out of spam, and what a nice boss to make a post about him. You guys ought to know a hoax. To which 26 responds, "You are an ass. Milo is my friend and I was taking him to dinner on Friday. He worked at home most days. I guess I ought to call his manager, so thanks for that. I don't know why he liked this stuff." Despite the skeptics, 26 would return to Reddit 2 days later to address the overwhelming response his post received and to share where Milo's ashes were spread. "Goddamn, I didn't know so many people could like him that didn't sling a gun with him. Thank you. So I'm out of here now. I don't do this stuff like you and Milo. Take care, keep the faith." To casual bystanders, this concluded their investment into this online saga. Religion of Peace was pushing 80 after all, and a sudden death due to old age wasn't exactly a big surprise. And so, there we have it. A story about a borderline illegal subreddit moderator who talked about war stories and lashed out to whoever he wanted to, eventually passing away, forever leaving his account embedded into internet history. The end. To some, though, things weren't feeling right. It was too sudden, Too convenient for a highly taboo subreddit moderator to just vanish, followed by a completely random account with a strangely specific name to swiftly announce his death before disappearing too. Given his online activity, it just seemed like too easy of an out, and across Reddit, there were a few that took notice of this. So they began to dig. It was known that he had a very specific style of grammar and was, in some capacity, close to Religion of Peace. 26 isn't exactly the most common choice for a username either, so they had that going for them. Eventually, they found their way to an account made in 2001 on a news aggregation website named fark.com, and within it, user 11057 was found to be the profile of an angel, Angel26. The account was created in October of that year, and the email address attached to it was found to be angel.2.6@lakecityquietpills.com. Also, upon scrolling down to their bio, it read, "Dispensing Lake City Quiet Pills to lousy bastards in need of permanent rest since 1968. Now, this is undoubtedly a connection to what we would come to know as that old guy's image host 8 years later. But why the hell was it left on an account from 2001? Eventually, Angel26 was found in the comments section about various articles centering on 9/11, since this was a little over a month after this tragedy happened. Interestingly, the typos and grammatical errors found from the Reddit 26 are non-existent, giving rise to the tenuous possibility that perhaps these two 26s were run by different people. Numerous posts on various platforms gave results for an Angel26. On ZBrush.com, they gave praise to the community for being so welcoming in 2001. On Yahoo Answers, they responded to questions about cleaning World War II bayonets and painting a patio around 2008. And on a website named Jaguar PC, they can be seen talking about spam filtering, a topic that undoubtedly sounds familiar. Clearly, they had a tenured history in various corners of the internet, and those reading into this began to take notice. There was a lingering sentiment that something was off with these mysterious usernames though. Things weren't exactly adding up. And there had to be more to this. The URL of the page you're currently viewing is the following: lakecityquietpills.com/photo/multihost/index.php. This is what you get when you click home. Curiously, if you head to lakecityquietpills.com without any of the subdirectories, you're merely met with a blank page. This stood out. Typically, something as simple as an image host would have some information here. A redirect, a 404, something. But there wasn't. In response, investigators viewed the page source to see what's up, and after scrolling to the end, they were met with this. Job postings, acronyms, and verbiage that seem to be hidden from the public eye. Shade is maintaining the calendar and access to the file dump. Angel has the job postings for EU and Asia. We aren't sending anyone to ME. No one. Don't ask for listings. Immediate need. 12 SA Spanish speaking. No papers required. No records kept. 4-week paid sequester if refused. 4 Italian/Spanish speakers. No Euro W/W. Must be bondable. 4 for 24/7 DP. 4-week gig. English speaking. Spanish and Portuguese fluency a plus. You get the idea. It seemed that there was some sort of undercover operation going on, and with acronyms like W/W alluding to phrases like wet work or wants and warrants, among a myriad of others, the potential for nefarious activity was clear. Back on Reddit, people began discussing this bizarre discovery. Milo was long gone, however suspicion was mounting on whether he was part of some undercover contract for hire assassination ring. Onlookers began picking apart the name Lake City Quiet Pills, as it was always a strange choice for something as simple as a pornographic image host. The term Quiet Pills, especially considering its context in Angel 26's FARC bio, really made it appear that it wasn't about pills at all. Rather, it seemed to be bullets. Lake City Quiet Pills have been alluding to bullets. Further supporting this is the fact that in Lake City, Missouri, a Remington Arms ammunition plant has been in operation since 1941, dispensing around 1.4 billion rounds per year. Considering Milo's extensive, alleged military background, it was safe to assume that this is how he coined this mysterious phrase. As investigators dug back further, they found an HTML message dated the same day as Milo's supposed passing. It read the following: "I'm sorry to tell you that old Milo died yesterday. He went quiet and calm, not like we all figured. I gave that fat mangy cat of his to the little girl next door. No services or nothing. You know Milo. I'm taking his ashes back to where his farm was. Close to it anyway. There's a mall where his place was. So hoist a few for the old man. Remember what he said. Keep with the man who's got your back." Another notable message was made in November. In this one, 26 explains how they're gonna cash out with Milo's will. Milo's will cleared probate. Surprise, Milo was loaded. Email Shade if we sent you out in 2005 to 2009. Shade will have checks cut for you. Amount is by how many times, not pay total. Small share is 3 to 4K. And just 2 months later, another. Happy New Year, everyone. We're having a birthday party for the old man on the 19th. Party starts at 1500 at the usual. Send your RSVP to Shade. FYI, we're booking a room for 3 days for anyone coming from out of town and overnight for locals. Come hoist one for Dutch Milo. Now, at first, you might assume that this is but an innocent remembrance party for their late friend. It seemed a bit weird to promote it on what seemed like a hidden job board, but hey, to each their own. January 18th, 2010. We got 38 rooms in the Marriott on 46th. Shade has the key card for locals. Pick up at the party. Give your travel name to the desk, and that's it. No ID needed since we're covering the bill. Keep the room service under 500, okay? The phones there are not secure. Bus from the hotel leaves at 13:30. Car service vouchers for return trip when you're ready to crash. Don't DUI. Now, it was here when people began to realize that this party might not have been what it claimed to be at all. There was a reason they were worried about the phone lines. Using fake names, you get the idea. Something else was going down, and it sure as hell didn't seem to be a celebration. Ominously, on January 19th, the very same day and around the same time that this party was supposed to happen, a sudden high-profile assassination would send a shockwave across the world, skyrocketing the Lake City Quiet Pills mystery into the stratosphere. What previously appeared to be a fringe, bizarre internet mystery began to have real-world connections, leading onlookers to theorize that the hidden job board was much more serious and deadly than they initially assumed. At 3 p.m. local time in Dubai, an Hamas arms dealer named Mahmoud al-Mabou was traveling alone under a fake name. Earlier the same day, he had crossed paths with a group of people also traveling with fake names. However, he was unsure of who exactly these people were. At 3:25 p.m., he arrives to check in. He requests a room with no balcony and sealed windows to ensure that the only way in was the front door. At 3:51, the assassination team arrives and reserves the room across the hall. At 4:25, Mabou leaves to go shopping. Meanwhile, the team breaks in and lies in wait. 8:24, Mabou returns to his hotel room, is immediately injected with a paralytic muscle relaxant, and is killed by suffocation. His body was discovered the next day, after room service discovered his door was locked from the inside. For 10 days, they believed it was a natural death, at least until they saw that footage. And thereafter, his murder would stand as one of the most perplexing cases that Dubai police have ever faced. Now, this is a highly abbreviated summary of the events that transpired that day. However, you'll understand why later on. The reason I wanted to bring this up was because it led people to theorize that the names behind Lake City Quiet Pills were involved. Although, to date, none of this has ever been confirmed. About 2 weeks after this, the Lake City website would update once more. February 2nd, 2010, party bills. Here's the final for the party. Hotel rooms 48,341, limo 6,080, bus 569, bar bill 18,890, food 8,030, dancers 8,300, miscellaneous tips 850, miscellaneous expenses 2,840, and medical supplies 180. Fat Tommy and Stu were okay too. Total bill 94,080. You all did Dutch Milo proud. Thanks. Given such a monumental price for this trip, combined with the events that took place during the assassination, investigators began to run with the possibility of these guys being undercover hitmen. More and more eyes began to pour onto LakeCityQuietPills.com over the next few months, and resultingly, subsequent source code messages were encrypted. When people tried to crack them, they were encrypted again and again until they abandoned this method of communication entirely. To date, this code has never been cracked and remains online through the internet Wayback Machine. The aliases never returned, and nothing more, ever, came from this. Well, what a hell of a ride. Taboo subreddit moderator gets caught up in some sketchy business, promotes a strange website, and completely vanishes, leaving behind an obscure undercover operation that may or may not be linked to real-life assassinations. As you can tell, there's a hell of a lot going on here, so let's recap on the facts and outline what we definitively know so far. For one, in 2007, an account was made named Religion of Peace. He claimed to be an old man and was a moderator for r/jailbait. 2. Religion of Peace claimed to be 79. However, there were instances of him slipping up and claiming he's 70, effectively knocking his credibility down a bit. Of course, he could have mistyped since the 9 and 0 are right next to each other. However, regardless, his age has been inconsistent. 3. The very same day Milo died, an account named 26 suddenly announced his passing. This account carries similar interests to another online alias named Angel26, however their typing styles are distinct. 4. The website LakeCityQuietPills.com is tied to Angel26 given their email address. 5. The Lake City Quiet Pills website legitimately hosted images over the course of years. And 6. There were hidden messages in their website source code, hinting at potential organized crime. To be honest, everything past this, while fun to dig through, has been purely conjecture and theory based upon the foundation of prior theories. Personally, I don't believe that these people are tied to the assassination of Mahmoud al-Mabou, which is why I didn't dig much into it. However, I do believe that there's another overarching mystery here. LakeCityQuietPills.com has been a monumental internet rabbit hole spanning decades, and to date, a definite identity hasn't ever been tied to it. Alongside that, we never got closure about the Angel and Reddit 26 discrepancy. Who were they? Where did they come from, and where did they go after the Milo situation? Also, whatever came of that old guy's image host? As we can recall from FARC, they've had the domain as far back as 2001, so how exactly did it begin? If you can't tell by now, we ain't done here. We've got a lot of loose ends to wrap up, so enough of me rambling. Let's go find some answers. Like we touched on, there seemed to be a glaring inconsistency with this comment that was left on a post asking about Redditor ages. As we can recall, Religion of Peace was extremely transparent about his life and made it absolutely clear that everyone knew that he was 79. Now, a few moments ago, I entertained the possibility that this 70 comment could have been a simple typo, which it very well could be. However, this July claim is interesting. Let me explain. What you're looking at is a website archive from August 9th of 2009, just 3 weeks after Milo's passing. Above where the website images otherwise would be, we can observe an interesting detail. Rest in peace, Milo. January 20th, 1930 to July 17th, 2009. So not only did Milo get his own age wrong, but also his birth month. Even stranger, his supposed birthday month turned out to be his actual death month, which raises suspicion that this alleged death event might have been premeditated by either Angel 26 or a group of people that were close to him. As we can recall, the Reddit 26 account and the Angel 26 accounts had wildly differing typing styles over the course of just a few years, lending to our suspicion that these accounts were run by separate people. With this in mind, I began poking around the image host archives in hopes of finding any clues on how we can verify this, and found that, surprisingly, some of the pictures are still accessible today and harbor a glaring similarity that leads us deeper into this rabbit hole. On each of them, we can observe a single watermark pointing us to a website named drunkenstepfather.com. Drunken Stepfather is a website harboring images with naked celebrities, and you get the idea. Clearly there's a crossover in content between That Old Guy's image host and Drunken Stepfather, so it somewhat makes sense. Interestingly though, if we perform a forum search for the string That Old Guy's image host, we're able to find a thread created by a familiar name. 26. It's 75 pages long and spans 4 entire years, from 2010 up until the website's death, and surprisingly paints an immensely clear picture as to what was going on during that time. Posted on the 15th of April 2010, things kick off when 26 simply claims that That Old Guy's image host is up. Below this, we're able to find a plethora of other users thanking them for their efforts and expressing excitement that they're able to begin uploading porn again. Further on page 6, we can observe a comment by a user named Satan666 in which they claim, "Man, 26, I don't know how to thank you for all your hard work on this. Considering that Old Guy's image host is basically running only for Drunken Stepfather and you don't make any money from it at all, your work is seriously way above and beyond the Call of Duty. Thanks so much. You have no idea how appreciative I am." This clarifies why so many of the archived images carried the Drunken Stepfather watermark, since by this point in time after Milo's supposed passing, most of the traffic came from not r/jailbait, but this website alone. Furthermore, we're presented with the claim that their image host has no way to make money, which we'll soon find to be a problem. Moving on to page 9, we can observe this manifest into a real-world issue. On the 10th of May, a user named JustGrooven makes a comment about the website's loading times, to which the Reddit 26 responds, claiming that they've been altering client settings and are frustratingly out of ideas on how to fix it. Heading down a bit further, we're able to observe an interaction between a Predator24 and Satan666. Predator inquires, "How long has it been since the website went down? Is it a money problem as to why the site's been a disappointment lately? It used to be awesome, but now... I mean, come on, really? Please get it back to how it was." To which Satan responds, Milo left him 25 grand when he passed. I seriously doubt it's a money issue. Plus, I've offered multiple times to pay for server costs and bandwidth, and 2.6 won't have it. I'm sure these are little problems that'll get worked out. Shit happens. Even Imager went down a couple times the past few days. How much trouble has Drunken Stepfather had getting banned from image hosts? 2.6 is doing us a favor by keeping the site running and paying out of his own pocket. Don't forget that. He makes zero money from this site and keeps it free of adverts. Now, while this initially seems like a noble move by 2.6, we'd soon find that his life would take a sudden and unexpected turn. Over the next few months, a barrage of comments would flood in about 2.6 heading out to a mission in Uganda, explaining the various server issues. However, by October, Satan 666 would announce his eventual death. According to an email from Shade, he had suffered a stroke before falling into a coma and passing away. Monday, October 25th. I wish it could be a joke. Truly, I do. On the 31st, his living will goes into effect and the life support will be turned off. I've been working with 2.6 for almost 25 years. I never expected to see him like this. Dead, sure, but not falling apart in a hospital bed. Milo went last year and now 2.6 looks to be checking out. We've had a real rough patch here. 2.6's replacement will be taken over tomorrow. I've given him 2.6's notes, and between us, we've deciphered most of it. With the notes and the kid we had in to work on the network for us, we don't expect any problems. Shade. That replacement was a user named JP4, and in December of that year, Satan 666 would officially announce it. For those that haven't read it in other threads, JP4 is 2.6's replacement, so yes, he is part of the crew. Just to clear up any confusion. For the next year, JP4 had his work cut out for him. He was found on various other websites trying to raise funds for that old guy's image host. However, his success in doing so is undetermined. Fast forward to August though, and LakeCityQuietPills.com begins a years-long stretch in which it would shift hands between 4 other owners. In August of 2011, a user named Pierce replaces JP4. In October, someone named Bishop replaces Pierce. In May 2012, a Kim replaces Bishop. And last but not least, in October of that year, its 7th and final owner takes the helm, named Madam Meow. Now, as you can tell, this group was shifting through admins like no tomorrow. And interestingly, during this time span, these people would occasionally share key information, allowing us to formulate a rough location from where LakeCityQuietPills.com was hosted. For instance, on the 26th of August 2011, Pierce had announced that Hurricane Irene, affecting the northeastern United States, would temporarily take the site offline. In October of that same year, Bishop jumped in with another, warning about the impending Halloween nor'easter snowstorm that affected the same region. Even further evidence pointing here came on the 17th of November. That day, a user named The Snake shared an email from Bishop, imploring site users to run a traceroute terminal command to test their intermittent server issues. Within this, he provided an IP address, and after geolocating it, we found that it points us to the state of New Jersey, aligning with where those 2 storms took place. Keep this in mind, we'll come back to it. At the end of the day, LakeCityQuietPills.com was, for its entire life, plagued with problems. From management to constant downtime, they were reactive in handling this website in lieu of being proactive. No further hidden job board postings ever came, and by 2014, the website would go offline for good. With it, Shade, 2.6, JP4, Pierce, Bishop, and Kim would vanish, leaving the corpses of their online personas forever behind them. The The earliest archive for LakeCityQuietPills.com is shown to be from the year 2004. And the web page we get? Pretty uneventful. Here, we can observe a basic placeholder page for a future website named insimbasic.rackshack.net. Insim essentially was a hosting automation software that was available for Windows PCs back in the early 2000s, which is likely why we see this phrase in the web address. Unfortunately, there aren't any archives for this Insim Basic web address outright. However, given that this was utilized as a redirect for LakeCityQuietPills.com as far back as 2004, we can assume that there's more to the story. As we can recall, Angel26 was active on FARC as far back as 2001, so the concept of Lake City Quiet Pills ostensibly dips back as far as the late 90s. While this RackShack domain might appear to be the earliest, the URL registration details paint a story much deeper. According to Hoster Stats, a historical registration database, we can observe that LakeCityQuietPills.com was first purchased in September of 2001, utilizing a domain host named crystalwind.com. Now, this might seem innocuous and insignificant. However, the Crystal Wind domain actually harbors an extensive history that we'll soon find to be related to Lake City Quiet Pills. Welcome to the first archive of crystalwind.com. The site's home to a startup company named Crystal Wind Consulting, run by a man named Mike. At first glance, things seem completely fine. The homepage invites viewers to reach out if they need help web hosting, and that they'll be happy to provide it. No big deal, everything checks out. Over the course of the next year and a half, the website would undergo minor yet notable changes. As it turned out, Mike was highly opinionated with politics and the state of world events, a personality trait that undoubtedly sounds familiar. In December of 1998, we can observe the Crystal Wind website update with a quote from Bill Clinton regarding Richard Nixon. At the bottom of it, we can observe him, in all caps, demand that he takes his own advice. Now, this was a different time period, right in the middle of the Wild West days of the internet, so Mike ripping the president on his business website isn't all that weird? Or is it? Honestly, I don't know. The main takeaway here is that he appears to be opinionated and isn't afraid to show it. Moving on to October 5th, 1999, Crystal Wind updates once more with the link titled Go Tigonauts, a site about Chinese space news. At the very bottom of his homepage, though, we can observe a strange link claiming, "Don't use these email contacts." Heading to that page presents a bizarre assortment of nonsensical email addresses and website links, and clicking on them brings us further and further into a wormhole of endless web pages. Now, this could be an attempt to capitalize on random SEO. However, I find it strange that this list is public. Anyway, circling back to Crystal Wind, if we click on their link titled Our Customers, we're simply met with this. Another strange, out-of-place page for a business website, but perhaps he was having a bit of fun. Moving on, March 2nd of 2000, the website adds another domain to its repertoire. All else remains the same. On June 13th of that same year, however, the homepage would vanish entirely. Instead of promoting their company or obtaining new clients, the Crystal Wind domain would simply show the face and quote we saw prior. And for the rest of the year, the website would remain this way, frozen in time. It's when we jump forward to September, right after 9/11, however, when things change. I'm sure you can see how far we're diverting from the website's original purpose. What appeared to be a simple web host slowly began showcasing political opinions before harboring a page full of bizarre links, shutting down entirely, being replaced by a simple quote, and is now showcasing a message aimed at the perpetrators of 9/11. There's a growing sentiment that there's more than meets the eye with crystalwind.com, and for years, this website would harbor nothing but this message. No links, no redirects, nothing. On April 1st of 2004, however, the website updates for the first time in years. Familiar. Before us, we have that same placeholder page from lakecityquietpills.com from around the same time as the earliest archive of that website. Both of these URLs were set to redirect to this single page, effectively cementing the connection between that old guy's image host and Crystal Wind Consulting. As we can recall though, there was a considerable gap before lakecityquietpills.com as we know it came to be. From 2004 to 2009, there was nothing, not a speck of evidence as to what the site was used for. Luckily for us though, the same can't be said for crystalwind.com. The archive you're looking at is from the year 2007, and to be honest, it seems a bit unorthodox. After browsing through each of these links, I found that the outliers are these two, Scooby and Sharky. Heading to the former presents us with various files: a blindfold, a body tank, DJ headphones, and an experiment table. Bizarrely, each of these display a 3D model of a woman in a distressing position, and if we consider each of the items listed here, we can deduce that this is perhaps some sort of fetish thing. Backing out and checking out Sharky gives us more of the same. Here, we can observe an entire section of this website with various 3D maps, models, hairstyles, and rooms. Weirded out, I decided to poke around a bit and found that here too, the downloads are still accessible. I checked out this rocket vampire model, and upon unzipping the parent folder, I noticed this README file within it. Some notable bits of info here are the website cybergatecorp.ch and the credits, which thank a person named Trent the Thief for spending the needed web space for this piece. Upon digging into cybergatecorp.ch, I happened upon a storefront that was incredibly similar to the pages found on Crystal Wind. At the top, we can observe links to various websites, and this one in particular takes us to a website called 3D Commune. After scanning their site, I'm sure you can gauge the type of 3D models that were sold here. It's yet another domain that aligns with everything else in this mystery, especially considering what we know about a very specific person who used a 3D modeling website as well. Either everyone was into the same topic around the same time period, or this Trent the Thief person is pulling some strings behind the scenes. To ease my hunch that this was Mike, I performed a search for both Crystal Wind and his name and found this archived email thread from 1997. And at the very bottom, what name do we find? Trent. If we back up and really take a look at every coincidence so far, the case of Mike being Religion of Peace and even Angel26 grows stronger the further down this rabbit hole we go. Mike has verifiably used personas, exhibited bizarre behavior on his business website, and harbors shared affinities with the others we've covered in this video. So let's back up, put everything on the table, and make our case. Ladies and gentlemen, to me, the mystery of Lake City Quiet Pills goes a little something like this. Let's begin with Angel26. As we know, they were a person that had a highly similar typing style to Religion of Peace, and also held a Lake City email address as far back as 2001. Furthermore, we know that they were found on ZBrush around the same time period, and if we perform a scan of the Religion of Peace Reddit account with this in mind, we find that... Aha! How coincidental, especially considering that we can find Trent the Thief on this side as well. We can find another interesting parallel if we head to the latest archive of crystalwind.com and inspect the page source. As we can see, there are hidden messages utilizing the exact same method on the Lake City Quiet Pills job board. However, here, it's mostly innocuous information about TI calculator keys. Regardless, the idea is there, and this method is by no means common. Yet another link surfaces if we check the crystalwind.com IP address. Here, we get a result pointing us to the state of New Jersey, and after cross-checking it with the IP from Bishop's email, we find that they are an exact match. Bishop's email was sent about 10 years after Crystal Wind supposedly stopped hosting Lake City Quiet Pills. So if Mike were completely removed from everything about this mystery, why are their server IPs the exact same? Even further connections arise when you really get into the nitty-gritty of Religion of Peace's post history. Remember that quote from Crystal Wind? Well, Religion of Peace references the exact same author. Remember Angel26's Yahoo comments? Both Angel and Milo misspell a very specific word in the exact same fashion. Now, from this point, I knew there were theories out there and we had our correlations, but I wanted to make absolutely damn sure that we put this rabbit hole to bed for good. I enlisted the help of a few private investigators who took this information and performed open source data pivoting with the accounts we suspected were related. And after a ton of connecting and forking, we found this email tied to an old forgotten Angel26 account from 2009, predating the events of Lake City Quiet Pills. And upon reverse searching this address, you'd be surprised at who it's tied to. This mic is also tied to emails from the Crystal Wind domain, and yeah, freaking bingo. Weirdly, he's also connected to a ton of other emails related to the Instagram travel blog in this picture, which I find incredibly strange, but that's a whole ass rabbit hole for another time. This guy seems to have been pulling the strings this entire time, and I'm convinced that he created not only Religion of Peace, but Angel26, the Reddit 26, and even Shade. Thinking back, we always had an impression that Milo's life was too extraordinary to be true, and combined with that monumental slip-up about his own age, it's taught us an interesting lesson. For someone surrounded by so many remarkable and unbelievable circumstances, perhaps the best explanation has always been the easiest one, that his life isn't real, because he simply did not exist. Milo was a moderator for one of the most controversial subreddits of all time. Milo openly hosted his own image website, placing the burden of guilt for any illegal material solely on himself. It was time for him to die, to pass the torch of liability. And what better way to do that than announcing it with another burner alias that also, just 1 year later, would pass away too. It seems that this entire mystery stems from Mike's own regret of his image board self-promotion through the Religion of Peace account. He had second thoughts and needed distance, a way to cleanse himself from the baggage. And, well, you know the rest of what went down. The mystery of Lake City Quiet Pills was born. Now, regarding the other users of Drunken Stepfather, it's unclear if they were simply in on it, or if they were completely oblivious to everything going on. It's honestly impossible to say, however my bets lie in the latter. Their community, much like us, were getting duped for years, but considering what they were using the image host for anyway, I don't think they really cared. Regardless, whether they knew it or not, they were a part of one of the largest internet mysteries in history. And if they ever see this, somewhere down the line, perhaps they can look back and think, holy shit, who would have thought? Well, ain't this the mystery that keeps on giving? Alright, so some info's come to light in a very late stage of this script, and I'd like to share it. On September 24th, 2017, a strange event went down on the Drunken Stepfather forums. That evening, Madame Meow's account was hacked and deleted, and the others quickly took notice. In this thread, people discussed what they think happened, and upon jumping to page 5, we can observe a response from the website's creator. Just to clear up some things, I love Madame Meow. She's the star of DSF. I would never delete all her contributions. Without her, there's no DSF. She's the only one who actually matters. The rest of you are the worst. It looks like someone got into the back end of the forum, and not in a good way. Not a way we'd all like to watch get into a back end, but in an asshole way, and deleted her account. Specifically her account. Targeted. I have no idea why. A few other accounts were deleted also. We're trying to restore the forum from a time before Meow was deleted by whoever got into the backend. This will bring back her OG account. We're also trying to patch up whatever holes there are in the system that allowed for things like this to happen. I've made her a temp account while we figure this out. Now, at first, it might seem unsurprising. The site is relatively archaic, and hacks like this are par for the course online. What I find interesting, though, is that when backing up and considering the scope of everything we've seen so far, the accounts of Shade, 26, JP4, Bishop, Kim, Pierce, and Satan666, the main players from the site's heyday, are all gone. Wiped. This is strange to me because 26 had supposedly died, rendering this deletion impossible unless someone knew his login. Weirdest of all, however, if we head to the Lake City Quiet Pills subreddit, we can find a bizarre post from a user named Retirement Plan LCQP, made just one day before this forum hack took place. In this post, the user implores people to stop looking into this mystery, gives some background on Milo and Shade, and closes things off with a peculiar phrase. A message to the LCQP. I cleared your tracks. Have a good one. When I first encountered this post, I figured this line was aimed at the audience. However, considering the hack and how every Lake City related forum account is gone, I now suspect that it's not the case. Despite this, the connections we've made to Mike all point to him being Milo. I still stand by that theory because there are too many correlations to overlook. What I won't deny, though, is that something weird took place that day, giving me second thoughts on the people behind the other accounts. Perhaps it was Jesus, the website's owner, or maybe it was a rogue admin. I don't know. But contrary to my initial belief, maybe Mike wasn't a one-man army after all.
Today's video is brought to you by Audible. Now, if there's something that I've started to do more and more when it comes to making videos online, it's that I've started to make more of an effort to write the script for my video in a way that you don't miss any key details just by listening. And based on this poll I did a while back, about 69% of you prefer to listen to videos over watching them. And if you're someone who likes consuming content in this way, then you'll probably like today's sponsor, Audible, the go-to service when it comes to audiobooks. With the Audible Plus catalog containing thousands of audiobooks, exclusive Audible original titles, and podcasts on a number of subjects, Audible has not only made housework a heck of a lot more entertaining, but Audible has also helped me research the videos I do for this channel. Just off the top of my head, a few titles that I'm a fan of or I've used in part for research include Nick Bilton's American Kingpin, which I've recommended a couple times. I also used the Book of Satoshi. I also used Final Destination Disaster in regards to Flight 980. The Darkest Web was one of the sources I used for the Base of Mafia video, and the title Underground was useful for getting a background on Shinrikyo when I did the whole VHS video. With all of that being said, try Audible absolutely free for 30 days by going to audible.com/sociable or texting sociable to 500-500. Once again, that's audible.com/sociable or text sociable to 500-500. And thanks once again to Audible for making this video possible. The following excerpt was written by Harold William Tillman, a legendary explorer who led an expedition to Heard Island in 1964. Heard Island, in latitude 53 degrees 10 minutes south, longitude 73 degrees 35 minutes east, is an uninhabited sub-Antarctic island lying about 300 miles to the southeast of the much larger island Kerguelen. Measuring only some 23 miles by 12 miles, it culminates in the peak known as Big Ben, which is 9,005 feet high. Thus, the island is nearly all mountain. A mountain heavily glaciated on all sides. Many of the glaciers terminate in ice cliffs that are washed by the sea. As far back as 1957, I had an eye to Big Ben, but inquiries shown that there was no safe anchorage where mischief could be left. A letter, too, from Mr. P.G. Law, then and now director of the Australian Antarctic Division, had been discouraging. As regards your getting to Heard Island, he had written, "I cannot overstress the dangers which will face you if you proceed in a small boat. As you know, Heard Island is right in the track of the great westerly cyclones which sweep across the Southern Ocean, with almost no intervening period of good weather of any duration. The seas are mountainous, and altogether I can think of no worse place to sail a small craft." Now, Tillman would captain a ship called the Patinella for this particular expedition. While Mischief was his usual ship, he didn't dare take it to this place, and due to his efforts, they were later successful in reaching the summit of this remote and desolate place. As a result of this being the first time that Big Ben had been summited, it was an achievement heard across the globe. But what nobody knew at the time was that Tillman would later disappear at sea some 13 years later, with not a trace of him being found since. At the age of 79, he had been attempting to lead a similar world-first expedition to Mount Foster in the Antarctic. But after the ship had left port in Rio de Janeiro, what followed was an eerie silence, as the man who had spent his entire life cheating death had seemingly finally had his time. Between fighting in both world wars, including the First Battle of Somme, and earning medals for bravery each time, to setting world records for exploration and mountain climbing, until he eventually became a world-class celestial navigator. And it's safe to say Harold William Tillman was truly an extraordinary man with a death wish. While you might wonder what would drive a man to spend the entirety of his life on these types of excursions, in a few remarks about the war after the fact, he stated that he was often questioning why he was the one who had survived. And as a result of not wanting to be left alone with his thoughts, he could never fully adjust to a mundane life. As a result, this led to Tillman being a part of some of the earliest recon trips to the Himalayas for mountaineering. And for a time, he even held the world record for the tallest mountain summited, that being Nanda Devi in the 1930s. Additionally, he is even responsible for scouting the route that would later become the standard approach for Everest. And that all being said, the Mount Heard expedition was just a final footnote on his extensive list of achievements. And had it not been for the Patinella, this world achievement would have likely never occurred. Because even for a man as fearless as Tillman, even he knew better than to take his ship Mischief on the journey. And when he asked if Patinella was a worthy vessel, he immediately reconsidered. For just like Harold Tillman had cheated death, the Patinella had also gained a reputation for cheating death as well. In 1954, the vessel had also been used for crayfishing, and on one particular day, the boat got into a bit of trouble and ended up gashing a major hole in its hull. Now, this boat had been equipped with a watertight bulkhead, which in turn managed to confine the water to only a certain part of the hull, preventing it from sinking. Miraculously, the boat had managed to make it back to the port unaided after spending 14 hours at sea. As a result, the Patinella had gained a reputation as an incredibly durable 63-foot steel-hulled ship that would be chartered for multiple voyages to all parts of the globe. Thus, this ended up making the Patinella a piece of history, not only for this world first, but also in Harold Tillman's often forgotten legacy. But unbeknownst to everyone at the time, the Patinella would later come to have another thing in common with Harold Tillman over 24 years later. Now, as time would progress, the Patinella would seemingly not be able to continue a mundane life either, as the boat had continued to pop up in newspapers over the years. In the 1970s, a man by the name of Norm Hunt had his own set of adventures with the Patinella, where in a around-the-world journey, he had eventually been iced in at Greenland Harbor. After spending days dodging icebergs, they eventually made it out unscathed. Additionally, on another voyage to Kenya during this time, the ship had been left unattended for less than half of an hour. After they returned back to the ship, they had found that the ship had been ransacked. And while it's definitely surprising just how many times this tiny ship had made headlines, we're really only getting started going into the 80s. Because that's when the story of the Patinella would really take a bizarre turn. That being in 1988, when after being passed down from owner to owner, the ship had eventually been purchased by a wealthy businessman from Perth by the name of Alan Nicol. At the time, the ship was valued at about $500,000. And after being purchased, this is when Patinella's final known journey would begin. On the 16th of October, 1988, the goal was a month-long voyage where they were to set out from Fremantle Harbor for Airlie Beach in Australia, where Nicol planned to vacation in the Whitsundays with his wife and their 2 children. The boat was also scheduled to work as a charter vessel thereafter. As the journey began, the boat had a crew of 6. On board was the schooner's owner, who we already discussed, his skipper, Ken Jones, a 52-year-old distinguished sailor, his wife, Noreen Jones, their daughter, Rona Lee Jones, and 2 young sailors, 23-year-old John Blissett and 21-year-old Michael Calvin. Blissett and Calvin were new to the boat, and they first started working for Alan after they both struck up a conversation with him at Fremantle before the journey started. Both of the young men explained that they were looking to gain sailing hours that they could add towards their navigational certificates. Additionally, they agreed that they could work as crewmen for the boat's charter business when they arrived at Airlie Beach. As a result, Nicol hired them. And as the first portion of the journey began, it was all smooth sailing. But on October 29th, both Rona Lee Jones and Alan Nicol had got off the boat at Port Lincoln for other work-related commitments. This is only temporary for Alan though, and he planned on getting back on the boat in Sydney on November 8th, where he would get back on the boat and continue to Airlie Beach to meet his family. But little did Alan and Rona Lee know that at the time they were getting off the boat at Port Lincoln, it would be the last time they saw Patinella ever again. As a result, this left 4 people on board: Ken Jones, his wife Noreen, and the 2 new crewmen, John Blissett and Michael Calvin. A few days after Alan was dropped off, on November 4th, Alan received a radio call from his skipper who claimed the boat was docked in Portland and that they needed money for fuel. While the money was later wired to Ken, he later withdrew it, but it's unclear if he actually purchased fuel that day. The next day, on November 5th, Michael Calvin's father had received a surprise call from his son. On the line, he said, "Good day, Dad," but after this, the line went dead. On that same day, Jones radioed Wilson's Promontory, where he gave a positional update. He would do the same thing on November 6th as they passed Bega. On November 7th, Patinella was spotted by a lighthouse keeper at Point Perpendicular. And as the sun set on the 7th and led into the 8th, at 1 a.m., a radio operator at Overseas Telecommunication Commission received a call from Ken Jones. He stated that Patinella was currently 10 nautical miles east from Botany Bay in Sydney. He would go on to say, "I believe we've run out of fuel. We've hoisted our sails, and we're tacking out to the east, tacking out about 080. Our intention is to tack out for a couple hours, then tack back in. We may need some assistance in the morning to get back into Sydney Harbor." Now, this transmission was noted to be odd by the family members for a couple of reasons. For one, Ken Jones' son had this to say after he listened to it. "It's certainly my father's voice in the tape, but it doesn't seem to be his words. I don't think he'd ever say he believed that he was out of fuel. He was too experienced to be so vague. I think his radio calls were veiled calls for help." Additionally, Alan Nicol stated that the Patinella would not have been short of fuel, as the 3,500-liter fuel tanks were filled to capacity at the start of the voyage, and additional diesel had been added at stops along the way. But the oddities don't end there. About an hour later, Ken called back and requested directions to the town of Maruya, which was 300 kilometers south. The operator provided the directions, but Ken soon called back again a few minutes later. This time, there was a lot of static on the line, and the only words that could be deciphered were 300 kilometers south? Is it south? This would be the last known communication from Patinella. Assuming they ran into trouble at night while sailing, it's worth pointing out that the boat had been equipped with an emergency position indicating radio beacon. Had some issue occurred on board, they would have been able to send a distress frequency to any passing aircraft overhead for 48 hours. Now, these beacons can either be activated manually or automatically if submerged in water, but no such signal seems to have been sent. Despite Ken failing to arrive at Sydney the next morning on the 8th, Nickel didn't report the boat missing. But I should clarify that he did not know about the transmission from the night before, and whatever reasoning Ken had for asking for directions to Maruya, that remains unclear. After the Patinella's last correspondence, it wouldn't be until 11 days later that the boat was actually reported missing. That was when the Patinella had failed to reach Airlie Beach on the 18th. At that time, Peter Jones, the son of the skipper, attempted to reach his father on that day. After multiple attempts to reach his father, he subsequently went to the authorities. But the authorities refused to launch a full-scale search. The Patinella case was plunged into controversy when the Federal Sea Safety and Surveillance Center in Canberra refused to launch a full-scale search for the yacht. The center said it had been notified 11 days after the yacht went missing, and that any proper search would have to cover an impossible 200,000 square kilometers of ocean. Now, after a 3-year investigation from the Australian government, they later declared in 1992 that the boat had simply sunk on that same night that they radioed into Botany Bay. Now, despite this conclusion, they never elaborated on how the boat sank, leaving that up to interpretation. While the weather definitely wasn't a factor, as the weather was calm that night when the boat disappeared, the investigation instead proposed that the boat was hit by another large freighter, and not reported for some reason. This was despite all other 48 vessels in the area that night having been checked for damage to their hull. None of them showed any damage. And it's worth mentioning that the boat was spotted multiple times after this night. Now, the investigation went on to claim that none of these sightings were ever confirmed. But that being said, some 6 months after the boat had disappeared, on May 9th of 1989, fishermen off the coast of Terrigal, about 30 miles north of Sydney, discovered a barnacle-covered buoy. After the fisherman retrieved it out of the water, he found that it bore the name Patinella. Now, this buoy was later sent to Sydney University for testing. Marine biologists there concluded that the buoy's growth of barnacles had determined that the buoy had been drifting for no more than 4 weeks, suggesting that the boat was still afloat some months later. But in various other retellings of the stories by officials working on this case, they disregard the 1-month claim and state the following. A life buoy identified as being from the Patinella was recovered from the Sea of Terrigal, New South Wales on the 9th of May, 1989. Marine growth adhering to the life buoy suggested that it may have been in the water for a considerable time, possibly 6 months. Now, there was some debate over this evidence in the investigation, predominantly on the note of the fisherman who had retrieved it out of the water, as he had rinsed off a portion of it to read the word Patinella. But based on the statements made in news reports at the time, marine biologists were also able to determine that the specific type of marine life found present on the life ring was specific to the Coral Sea, where they speculated that the life ring had drifted from a point near Cooktown, Australia. On top of that, the boat had been spotted at Rockingham Bay in March and at Fraser Island on June 9th. And interestingly enough, on June 3rd, an unidentified body had been found washed up on Manly Beach, 25 miles from where the buoy was found. The body that washed up on Manly Beach was 175 to 180 centimeters tall. It was believed to be a man between the ages of 20 and 30. However, the body had been so badly decomposed that the person was completely unidentifiable. Additionally, the man was believed to have had a slim build, and when they found him, he only had one leg remaining, with one of his shoes being a shoal size 9. While the police gave a rough estimate of him being at sea for about 4 weeks, keep in mind this is a rough approximation. Because when it comes to estimating a body's decomposition at sea, that's not something that we generally have a lot of data on. And there are a lot of variables when it comes to this process occurring at sea, such as water temperature, animal activity, and other studies have even pointed to things like water oxygen levels being a factor. And to elaborate a bit further on what I'm talking about here, one obvious variable that needs to be factored in is ocean scavengers. Things like sharks, crabs, and small fish will tend to pick apart a body pretty quickly. Depending on the animal activity, there can be a pretty drastic variance in a body's decomposition. And just recently, in another study on body decomposition, scientists found that scavengers would have selective preferences on bodies depending on the dissolved oxygen levels in the water. Additionally, another thing that is very common in bodies retrieved from shipwrecks or diving accidents and other maritime incidents is this thing called adipocere or grave wax. Essentially, adipocere is an incredibly persistent substance that forms from the decomposition of fat cells, ultimately leading to a preservational effect on the body. For example, in 2011, after a couple nearby earthquakes in Switzerland, a body was found floating in Lake Brienz. The investigation estimated that the body was as fresh as 6 months old, but as it turned out, adipocere ended up creating a massive cocoon on the torso of the body, and x-rays later showed that it preserved much of the internal portions of the man, including his heart, stomach, and other structures. They later examined cherry pits found in his stomach as well as some bone collagen from the cadaver. After further analysis, radiocarbon dating placed the man's death at 300 years. But that being said, adipocere's development isn't fully understood. And to quote this paper from the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, while several studies have been performed on the nature, the formation, and the degradation of adipocere, there's still no reliable model to assess the post-mortem interval of a body exhibiting it. But to put it simply, the ocean is still a mystery in many ways, and it's difficult to take this 4-week figure at face value without any kind of reasoning. Given this detail, who's to say that it wasn't 7 weeks to match the time frame of the buoy, or 7 months to match the night the Patinella disappeared? We truly don't know. But that being said, when push came to shove, this body seemed to line up closest with one of the missing crew members, Michael Calvin, and as such, police requested his dental records. Presumably, it wasn't a match though. I say presumably because there seems to be no further statement given on the matter. And besides a couple articles in local newspapers at the time, there isn't a single mention of this body in any other literature on this case. And when I say there's not a single mention of this body later on, not in regards to this case or any other case either. Searching for further information about a body that washed up at this particular location and time only ever yields these details. And given the findings of the marine biologists and the sightings that placed the Patinella in the area, all of these details seem to suggest that the Patinella was still afloat, perhaps hijacked with a new crew. Considering the aforementioned and assuming the two things were connected, it seems that one theory that could be proposed here was that there was some other emergency on the Patinella, ultimately leading to the deployment of the life buoy. One thing that seems to suggest this was a statement given by Alan Nickel at the time. When asked about the life ring, he stated that this wasn't just some object that would have fallen off the boat. It was located in a position that required manual detachment. But all that being said, there's also a chance that this body is perhaps related to something else entirely. But as far as the official record goes, whoever washed up on Manly Beach June 3rd, 1989, that remains unknown. Now, as the investigation continued, more and more sightings continued to occur across the globe, with the most common being along the Australian coast. Additionally, several other sightings were reported around Thailand and Southeast Asia, and one sighting even made it as far as South America. And all things considered, despite no distress signal being sent from the Patinella, with no debris of any kind being found, with no damage to any other boats in the area, the Australian investigation still concluded that the boat had to have sank on the same night in Botany Bay. And not only did they conclude this with a lack of evidence, they concluded this while dismissing other valid evidence at the time. Instead of addressing the marine biologist's findings, they were later misrepresented at a later date without any kind of clarification. And don't even get me started on that body, which is such an obscure detail it is yet to reach the light of day in any other discussion of this case. To put it simply, you'd think that if they were so certain the Patinella had sunk on the same night without any kind of hijacking or other crime taking place, the Australian investigation could prove it by searching a very specific area 10 miles off the coastline. But as far as I'm aware, no attempt was made to prove the investigation's theory. And to put it simply, the hit-and-run theory they proposed was a stretch, and I haven't even brought up the fact that the Patinella had received $40,000 worth of upgrades after going under new ownership. Included in those upgrades was a new radar system that would alert them to any nearby vessels, which would have made it next to impossible that they could have been a victim of a hit-and-run. Even if we factor in any kind of other disaster occurring on that same night, the fact that no debris was found the next morning leaves you with no reason to believe the boat had sank the night before. So all in all, a highly durable ship capable of sailing to any place on the planet, known for facing some of the world's toughest conditions, persevering through icebergs for days on end, that had just been upgraded with some of the best navigation and safety equipment money could buy, simply sank without any evidence, and the case was closed according to the professionals. Naturally, you have to ask what the hell was going on with this investigation. And to take a closer look at how the investigation ran its course, let's begin with Alan Nichols' actions after the Patinella disappeared. If you recall, Mr. Alan Nicholl never reported the boat missing. This detail is incredibly strange. Alan was due to be picked up on the 8th, but for some reason, he presumed that they had continued on without him. Despite some 11 days passing with no further correspondence, this still wasn't enough for him to say anything. And this makes it appear that perhaps some factor was preventing Nicholl from going to the authorities. It's possible, but it's also possible that Nicholl was also distracted by his day-to-day. Regardless of this strange detail, Nicholl definitely seemed concerned about the boat's disappearance, and he seems to have been very proactive in the search for the boat, because in the following months he went on to spend some $30,000, where he basically financed his own investigation and went to great lengths to interview people who had seen the ship. And most notably, after the Patinella had disappeared, he had made several allegations to Western Australian police. To start his list of suspicions, he suspected the skipper to have played some role in hijacking the boat based on previous business failures. But no further elaboration is given on this detail in later reports. The only thing that does even slightly seem to suggest this possibility was the final transmission. Ken Jones randomly asking for directions to Maria, that does definitely seem to point to some suspicious behavior. But it's also plausible that Ken could have been acting under duress, and like Ken Jones' son said, perhaps his final conversation was in fact a thinly veiled call for help. Now perhaps the most bizarre allegation by Nicholl was that he suggested that the previous owners of the boat were aggrieved of its sale, and plotted to get the boat back. He claimed that he was ripped off. And while the police investigated this point, I couldn't find any other details that would corroborate this at all. Getting back to the crew though, further allegations were made at John Blissett and Michael Calvin. This one seemed to be a bit more plausible though. In hindsight, he didn't know them very well. They were the only variable for this trip, and it also seemed suspicious that the two boys apparently admired the Patinella so much, it led them to ask for a job on the boat. At the time this case was being investigated, it definitely seemed plausible. But some 2 decades later, on New Year's Day 2008, a woman combing a secluded beach near the town of Eucla had found a message in a bottle from John Blissett. It was dated October 26, 1988. It read, "Hi there, out there on the lonely Southern Ocean, and thought we would give away a free holiday in the Whitsunday Islands in North Queensland, Australia. Our ship is traveling from Fremantle, Western Australia to Queensland to work as a charter vessel." It gave the Patinella's position as 34 degrees 24 minutes 20 seconds south, 129 degrees 18 minutes 54 seconds east. Additionally, it included a number for people to call to claim their prize, and he signed off saying, "See you soon, Jono." Now, ultimately, this note seems to suggest that the two boys were interested in going on an adventure, as this entire thing seems incredibly lighthearted. Presuming that they planned on doing something malicious in the coming days, this seems completely out of character. Now, moving on to the final allegation made by Nickel. That was that he suspected that the boat was hijacked by persons involved with trafficking narcotics. Based on his own investigation, which led him to interviewing various people who had spotted the ship, he had learned that the boat wouldn't stop into town for fuel or supplies. The ship was almost exclusively spotted around open water, and on the rare occasion that Patinella did dock into shore, it would only go to remote areas that were accessible by four-wheel drive vehicles. If we consider the strange behavior from Ken that night, with no emergency transmission, along with the later sightings of the boat placing it in Thailand, this theory, while reliant on eyewitness testimony, does seem to have some plausibility. While it is worth noting that eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, the Patinella was a pretty distinct ship given its older design. Assuming the sightings around Thailand were true, this would have placed the boat along a known trafficking route out of the Golden Triangle. Additionally, had this been the case, this could also account for the buoy drifting from some remote part in the Coral Sea. Additionally, the boat would have been refitted to disguise its look and then re-registered in a different country by bribing separate officials. On top of all of that, given the nature of what business we would be potentially dealing with this case, this can also account for some potential corruption in the investigation, which could explain the poor conclusion given by the investigation. But getting back to that investigation, let's take another look at how that all went down. Because after Nickel raised suspicions about a further crime and reported his allegations, from here there was apparently some internal struggle over who was responsible for the case, and as a result of bureaucratic issues, no work was done on this case for months. The investigation was later escalated from the Federal Sea Safety Centre in Canberra to the Australian Federal Police, and in February of 1989, they finally assigned Detective Superintendent Ed Tyree to be in charge of the case, with him being an advisor to who had the final say in the case, that being the state coroner Derek Hand. Now, in Australia, the coroner's role is a bit different. It's not a medical position. Instead, it's an appointed judicial officer with the legal job to investigate the cause of deaths reported to them. And it just so happens that this isn't the only questionable conclusion given by Mr. Derek Hand. And just recently, in 2019, the Australian police announced that they would be reopening one of his cases from this time. A case that has some similar circumstances to what we're talking about. That being the case of Robbie Joe Coulter, a 17-year-old teen who lived in Mildura. After Robbie had left a New Year's party in the early hours of the morning, he had last been seen walking along the side of a road. He never made it back that night. 2 days later, on January 3rd, 1989, Robbie's body would be found in a nearby river. His body had been weighed down with 21-kilogram mill bricks. His hands were found bound behind his back with bolts to secure them. According to local news reports at the time, Robbie Joe's family suspected he had been a victim of a mafia-style drug-related execution. And stepfather Linton Coulter revealed Robbie Joe had told him he feared narcotics dealers were out to get him after he had witnessed a drug drop 2 months earlier. Do you want to know what Derek Hand had to say about this particular case? He stated that he was, quote, quite satisfied that Coulter was not murdered. To add insult to injury, Mr. Derek Hand ruled that Robbie had taken his own life instead. Another unpopular theory, with one publication stating, the coroner made an open finding nobody, not least his mother and stepfather, agreed. And additionally, this would call into question the entirety of the police working alongside Mr. Derek Hand, as the police instead discredited the elephant in the room and insisted that there was some practical joke that could have gone wrong. Once again, they had no evidence to suggest this. Reportedly, the party was not a wild one. Robbie wasn't intoxicated, and additionally, it appeared that Robbie had made it back to his apartment thereafter. I should go on to state Robbie's family has been waiting 30 years for answers on this particular case. They had been asking every single year for the case to be reopened. And all that being considered, the same person who was responsible for this case is the same person who had the final say in the Patinella case. Now, it just so happens that Ed Tyree later found nothing and claimed these allegations made by Nickel were without apparent substance. He would later go on to give the statement, "Inquiries into various allegations insinuating that Patinella was afloat and involved in criminal activities are unable to be substantiated." This idea was discredited so much by Tyree's investigation that they seemed to fire accusations back at Nickel. And I kid you not, they went as far as to suggest that he had reported criminal suspicions as a way of dealing with, quote, perceived inactivity on the part of various agencies, both Commonwealth and state, to search for the Patinella. Now, ultimately, Ed Tyree and Derek Hand's investigation led to this hit-and-run theory, which makes absolutely no sense. But I should mention that not all of the members of the AFP had the same opinions. And when the life buoy was found, another detective superintendent by the name of Dave Lewington of the AFP, National Criminal Investigation Branch, he went on to say the buoy supported the theory that a crime had been committed on the boat. He cited the findings of the marine biologists and a recent oceanographic report, which had confirmed to him that prevailing currents at the time meant the life ring had to have floated from somewhere in the Coral Sea, not the Tasman Sea. And perhaps the most jarring thing about this investigation was the absolute slap in the face to the families after the fact. The detective working on this case was commended on his work in this investigation by the state coroner, Mr. Derek Hand. Think about that for a second. Derek Hand complimented his detective on finding nothing. Now, if I had to summarize this case, nearly every detail given in news reports at the time seems to conflict with the final statements given by the officials in charge of the investigation. And if you're wondering where I got these final statements, these all come from the Australian Federal Police's own publication in an article on the Patinella. While you might expect the most detail to come from an article written by the actual investigation, it was actually the least helpful and perhaps the most vague in regards to this case. And based on referencing every little piece of literature I could find on this case, it portrays a pretty dark and disturbing story. Neither Australian entity bothered to search for the boat after 4 people disappeared. Additionally, their reluctance continued after multiple sightings were made. The investigation never attempted to prove the boat's final resting place, despite claiming it was only 10 miles offshore from a major city. The investigation's conclusion contradicts multiple pieces of scientific evidence without any clarification, so much so that comments by their peers at the time have blatant contradictions. The investigation accused a victim of making false accusations, claiming he didn't actually believe them. But from other sources, we learn he spent $30,000 of his own money to search for the boat. The investigation claimed that every single sighting of the world-famous bright yellow ship was not verifiable. But when you dig up some of the news reports at the time, the sightings not only match certain time frames of other key details, they also seem to have a specific behavior, as Nickel noted. And perhaps the most interesting discrepancy was that the investigation had Michael Calvin's dental records tested on a body that washed up within close proximity and time frame to the only known piece of Patinella. While one police spokesman stated that nothing had indicated that it could have been a crewman from Patinella, their actions were completely contradictory, as it was reported that they had requested these specific records only. And with the results due in subsequent days, there was no further statement on this matter. Furthermore, it only makes sense in a situation where 2 corrupt individuals are conspiring together that a coroner would praise a detective for being so persistent at finding nothing. Questionable investigation aside though, wherever the Patinella is today, or what exactly happened to the crew, they are both still mysteries. And ultimately, we're left with more questions than answers. This is Barely Sociable. Have a good day.
On the 10th of November, 1975, the largest ship to ever sink on the Great Lakes slipped under the waters of Lake Superior and took every member of its crew with it. The exact cause was a mystery that spawned a massive investigation, but the truth remains shrouded even to this day. This vessel, the Edmund Fitzgerald, remains a stark reminder of the dangers that mariners face when going to sea on the waters of the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes. How do you describe something so vast to someone unfamiliar with them? These aren't simple run-of-the-mill backyard freshwater lakes. They're as vast as seas. I could tell you they are the largest freshwater system in the world and contains 84% of North America's fresh water. In fact, they contain 20% of the world's fresh water. The largest lake is the largest lake in the world based on surface area. This lake, aptly named Lake Superior, could fit the 4 smaller lakes of the Great Lakes inside of it. It's 350 miles wide, 160 miles long. Its average shoreline is 2,726 miles long, and it's an average of 500 feet deep and a max of 1,332 feet deep. But those are just numbers. They don't give you a true scope of the lakes or an idea of how dangerous they are. What about the fact that the lakes are home to an estimated 6,000 shipwrecks and the graves of nearly 30,000 sailors? These massive freshwater seas are more dangerous than most would believe, and yet they are nonetheless extremely useful. Around 125 million tons of cargo are shipped across the Great Lakes every year, 40% of that being produced from America's breadbasket, things like wheat, corn, oats, and soybeans. But another 40% are minerals and important ores, iron, taconite, coal, salt, and stone, fueling the U.S.'s huge industrial machine. In fact, our story centers around a massive powerhouse in that industry. Ordered on February 1st of 1957 by the Northwest Mutual Life Insurance Company, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was going to be an absolute behemoth of a lake freighter. At the time, she was designed to be exactly 1 foot less than the maximum allowable limit on the Great Lakes, 729 feet. This being because the locks in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, often just called the Soo locks, were 730 feet. Her beam was the maximum allowed limit of 75 feet. At the time of her commissioning, she was the largest ship on the Great Lakes. She would be a whopping 13,632 tons and could carry well over 25,000 tons in her hold. She had a crew of 29 and was driven by massive steam turbine engines that pushed her along at 14 knots. Named after the president and CEO of the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Edmund Fitzgerald, the man had a vested interest in Great Lakes shipping. His grandfather and 5 of his brothers were all mariners on the Great Lakes. On top of that, his company had large stakes in the coal and iron ore industries, which would explain why they were willing to fit the bill for the $8.4 million ship, just over $81 million when adjusted for inflation. Laid down on the 7th of August, 1957, she was commissioned the 7th of June, 1958. Now, this was where the superstitious type may take note. Her commissioning did not go off without a hitch. There were a few clear issues. A crowd of an estimated 10,000 people watched from set-up grandstands from the pier